Welcome back, dear listener, to another soft-spoken journey through the shadows of the past. Tonight, we travel not to battlefields or palaces alone, but into the tangled heart of one woman's rise and fall, a woman whose life became one of the most shocking scandals in all of Roman history. Her name was Valeria Messalina, wife of the Emperor Claudius, mother of his heir, and, in the eyes of many, the most dangerous woman Rome had ever seen. The Roman Empire was a place of both marvel and menace. Its marble temples glittered in the Mediterranean sun, its armies stretched across continents, and its citizens basked in the conviction that theirs was an eternal dominion, destined to endure as long as the gods themselves. Yet beneath the grandeur, stirred shadows of intrigue, treachery, and ambition. To walk the palaces of Rome was to tread a labyrinth where whispers could prove more dangerous than swords, and where loyalty was a mask worn only until betrayal became more profitable. Within this world of sharpened smiles and hidden daggers, a story unfolded that would bind love, power, and death in a knot of tragic inevitability. At its center stood two figures, Emperor Claudius, the scholar-turned-ruler, and his young wife, Messalina, whose beauty concealed a hunger that history has remembered with both fascination and dread. The tale begins, not in triumph, but in chaos, when the Emperor Caligula fell beneath the blades of his own guards in the year 41 CE. Rome trembled. For years, Caligula had ruled with a mixture of theatrical cruelty and unhinged caprice. He had styled himself as a god, demanded worship, and paraded his eccentricities as though they were marks of genius. By the end, senators, guards, and even members of his household had wearied of his excesses. The conspirators who struck him down acted less for Rome's salvation than for their own survival. His blood stained the marble corridors of the Palatine, and for a brief, dangerous moment, the empire seemed leaderless in that vacuum of power. The most unlikely of men was thrust into the purple. Claudius, uncle to Caligula, had long been dismissed as a harmless fool. Shuffling, stammering, afflicted by ailments of body and speech, he had been left to study in relative obscurity, while others seized the glory of war and politics. Many thought him simple-minded. Some laughed at his limp and awkward mannerisms, others at his absent-minded devotion to books. But in a twist worthy of Rome's gods of irony, it was this very reputation that saved his life. When Caligula was murdered, the assassins had no interest in Claudius. They assumed he posed no threat. Yet, hidden in the palace, trembling behind a curtain, Claudius was discovered by a soldier of the Praetorian Guard. Instead of striking him down, the guard saluted him as emperor. Soon, the Praetorians rallied behind this unexpected candidate. The Senate, divided and fearful, had little choice but to confirm the arrangement. Thus Claudius, mocked as a fool, rose suddenly to rule the most powerful empire the world had yet known. But Rome is never kind to the weak or to those perceived as weak. From the moment Claudius donned the purple, he carried upon his shoulders the sneering doubt of the aristocracy and the ceaseless scrutiny of the people. His reign would be tested not only by conspiracies and wars, but by the battles within his own household. For in Messalina, his young wife, he would find not merely a partner, but a force of ambition that rivaled the Senate itself. Valeria Messalina was of noble blood. her lineage woven into the intricate web of Rome's most powerful families. She was the daughter of Domitia Lepida the Younger and Marcus Valerius Messala Through her mother, she was linked to the imperial line itself, a relative of Augustus and his heirs. Such connections were never accidental. In Rome, blood was currency, and Messalina's veins carried the prestige of generations. From birth, she was marked not for obscurity, but for prominence. Raised among luxury and intrigue, trained in the arts of charm, wit, and survival. In the villas where senators plotted and matrons whispered, she learned early that beauty was a weapon as sharp as any dagger, and that marriage was rarely a matter of affection, a ladder to climb, a stage upon which to project ambition. When she was wed to Claudius, the match raised few eyebrows. Though Claudius was much older, he was already in his 50s, while she was scarcely out of girlhood. The union was advantageous for both sides. For Claudius, Messalinus' patrician connections bolstered his shaky legitimacy. For Messalina and her ambitious kin, marriage to the emperor promised influence of incalculable magnitude. Rome was a city where wives could be silent ornaments or dangerous partners, and Messalina had no intention of being the former. Even in her youth, those around her sensed in her a restless energy. She delighted in the privileges of her station, yet she hungered for more. To dine beside an emperor was not enough. She wished to shape the emperor's decisions. To enjoy the luxury of Rome's palaces was not enough. She wished to command them. The empire, after all, was a feast, and Messalina's appetite was one that no single course could satisfy. Claudius, for all his learning, did not see this clearly at first. Perhaps he was blinded by her youth, her beauty, or the flattering attentions she showered upon him. To a man long mocked as unworthy of affection, Messalina's devotion may have seemed a gift from the gods. But those who watched from the sidelines, courtiers, senators, and rivals, saw the makings of a different story. They saw in Messalina the spark of ambition that had consumed many before her, and they wondered what flames it might yet ignite. Rome itself mirrored her ambition. It was a city of contradictions, magnificent yet corrupt, devout yet decadent, disciplined in war but indulgent in peace. Its streets bustled with merchants and slaves, philosophers and thieves. Senators debated in the curia, while gladiators shed blood in the arena. Religion was woven into politics, and politics into every household. In such a place, where the line between private vice and public scandal was razor-thin, the rise of Messalina would soon capture both the gossip of the tavern and the peekaboo attention of the Senate. Yet, in these early years, her power was not yet unmasked. She played her role with skill, appearing the dutiful wife, the loving mother, the charming empress. Behind the veil, however, she was already testing her strength, whispering into Claudius's ear, rewarding allies, punishing rivals. Her ambitions were like the roots of a vine, hidden at first, but growing, twisting, preparing to climb and sow. In the shadow of Rome's marble temples, and within the guarded halls of the Palatine, a dangerous partnership began to take shape. Claudius, the scholar who never sought the throne, and Messalina, the empress, whose desires stretched beyond loyalty or tradition. Theirs was not a marriage of equals, nor of simple affection, but of opportunity. And in Rome, opportunity was often the prelude to tragedy. The empire did not yet know it, but the young woman now enthroned beside the awkward aging emperor would soon drive Rome to astonishment, scandal, and horror. For Messalina's story was only beginning, and ambition once kindled burns brighter than love and far longer than loyalty. The dawn of Messalina's true power began with the cry of a child. In 41 CE, scarcely a year after Claudius's unexpected rise to the throne, Messalina bore him a son, Tiberius Claudius Caesar Britannicus. His name carried the promise of Rome's future, and with it the security of his mother's ambitions. In an empire where succession was the beating heart of stability, the birth of Britannicus secured Claudius's fragile rule. To the people, the child was a symbol of hope. To Messalina, he was the key to her enduring influence. The streets of Rome rejoiced at the news. Priests sacrificed white bulls in the temples, and the Praetorian Guard paraded through the Forum in gleaming armor. Citizens hurled laurel leaves into the air as heralds announced the heir's birth. In whispered corners, however, senators calculated what it meant for their own fortunes. For as long as Britannicus lived, the dynasty of Claudius was safe, and by extension, so too was Messalina's position. She was no longer merely the young wife of an aging emperor, she was the mother of Rome's future. Claudius, despite his bookish nature and awkward bearing, adored his son. In Britannicus, he saw the continuation of his family's line, a chance to prove that the gods themselves had sanctioned his reign. His gratitude to Messalina deepened. She had given him what no Senate decree, no army of Praetorians could: legitimacy in the form of blood. From that moment, his trust in her grew firmer, his dependence upon her more complete. Claudius had always been insecure in matters of power, preferring scrolls to swords, libraries to legions. Now, with Messalina beside him, he felt shielded against the world's disdain. Messalina, perceptive as ever, understood the weight of his affection. She knew that Claudius was not like Caligula, intoxicated with cruelty, nor like Tiberius, withdrawn into suspicion and paranoia. He was a man who longed to be loved and respected, a man who sought loyalty where others demanded obedience. To such a man, Messalina offered both tenderness and manipulation in equal measure. She listened to his speeches, praised his scholarly pursuits, and appeared the dutiful empress. Yet behind her carefully practiced devotion, the more Claudius trusted her, the freer her hands became to weave her own web of influence. That web soon stretched far beyond the emperor's bedchamber. Rome's true power did not reside only in the Senate or in the decrees read aloud in the Forum. It also thrived in the shadows, in the whispers of slaves, the favors of freedmen, and the networks of clients who bound noble households together. Messalina grasped this instinctively. She began cultivating relationships with Claudius's household freedmen, the men who acted as secretaries, advisors, and intermediaries between the emperor and the world. There was Narcissus, sharp-eyed and ruthless, who managed imperial correspondence. There was Pallas, the financial administrator, whose mastery of Rome's treasury gave him wealth rivaling that of senators. There was Callistus, who oversaw petitions and appeals, holding in his hands the fate of countless citizens. To the senators of Rome, these men were former slaves elevated beyond their station, despised for their power. To Messalina, they were instruments, pliable and ambitious, willing to serve the empress if it meant furthering their own fortunes through flattery, promises, and subtle gifts. Messalina bound them to her cause. She became their patroness, the hidden force who could open doors or slam them shut. Soon, a quiet understanding emerged in the palace. To win Messalina's favor was to win access to the emperor. To cross her was to risk ruin. Senators who once scoffed at her youth found themselves petitioning her, seeking her intervention with Claudius. Petitioners, litigants, and ambitious families learned to approach her first. Knowing that her words carried more weight than many decrees, her influence did not remain confined to freedmen. She extended her reach to Rome's aristocratic families, arranging alliances through friendships and marriages, carefully selecting which households to support. By granting favors or orchestrating introductions, she tightened her grip on the city's social fabric. Banquets became her stage, where she studied senators and their wives, learning who was vulnerable, who was ambitious, who might be a rival or a pawn. Each feast was less a celebration than a reconnaissance mission. Each smile a mask concealing calculation. At first, Claudius seemed blind to these machinations. He saw only a devoted wife and loving mother, proud to sit beside him as he delivered speeches or presided over trials. Her interventions appeared harmless, even helpful. When she whispered advice into his ear or suggested which petition to grant, Claudius believed she was easing his burdens, protecting him from making mistakes. In truth, he was being led by a guiding hand more cunning than his own. Messalina's earliest manipulations were subtle but telling. A senator who had once mocked Claudius's stammer found his estates seized on charges of treason. A wealthy noblewoman who rivaled her beauty was accused of adultery and quietly exiled. Courtiers who dared to slight her discovered their requests denied, their influence diminished. Always, the punishments seemed to come from Claudius himself, but behind the curtain, it was Messalina who pulled the strings. Her cruelty, when it surfaced, was cloaked in necessity. Rome, she argued, could not afford dissent or disloyalty. Claudius, anxious to maintain control, often accepted her reasoning. Thus she learned how far she could push him, how much power she could wield under the guise of protecting his reign. And with each successful maneuver, her confidence grew. Yet Rome was not ignorant of these currents. Whispers traveled faster than decrees. In taverns and marketplaces, rumors spread of the empress's growing dominance. Some mocked Claudius as a husband ruled by his wife. Others feared the precedent her influence set. But none dared confront her openly. The Praetorian Guard, loyal to the emperor, treated her with deference. The Senate, resentful yet cautious, submitted to her authority. For now, her power was veiled, her manipulations disguised as wifely devotion. The seeds had been planted. With Britannicus as her anchor, Claudius's trust as her shield, and a network of allies as her weapon, Messalina stood poised at the threshold of greater ambition. The girl who had once been the emperor's youthful bride was now the mother of an heir, the confidant of freedmen, and the quiet ruler of Rome's domestic sphere. And though her enemies muttered in silence, they dared not yet rise against her. For in the empire of shadows, where influence was measured not in laws but in whispers, Messalina had already begun her reign. And the roots she laid in these years would soon grow into vines strong enough to strangle rivals, ensnare the Senate, and even challenge the emperor himself. The city slept beneath its marble domes, but within the Palatine walls, ambition never rested. The city of Rome glittered by day, but truly lived by night. In the palaces of the Palatine, where oil lamps flickered against painted walls and fountains whispered in hidden courtyards, power was measured not in decrees, but in invitations. A seat at Messalina's banquets was more than a sign of favor. It was access to the pulse of the empire itself. The young empress understood this instinctively. Feasts in her hands became instruments of rule. Senators who prided themselves on austere dignity found themselves leaning forward, laughing too loudly at her witticisms. Noble women watched her with veiled envy, taking notes of her gowns of Tyrian purple and emerald silk, of her daring hairstyles threaded with pearls. Slaves slipped between the couches with platters of roasted peacock and bowls of figs drenched in honey, while musicians plucked soft notes to drown out whispers of conspiracy. It was during these evenings that Messalina listened most keenly. A senator's careless boast after too much Falernian wine, a wife's jealous complaint, a freedman's nervous glance, all became threads in the tapestry she wove. Rome reveals itself at table, she once murmured to her confidant, her mother Domitia Lepida. In the Senate they wear masks. Here, in the glow of wine and candles, they drop them, and indeed Rome did. Claudius often attended these feasts, though awkwardly. He was no lover of excess, preferring scrolls to spectacles. But he understood that his wife's gatherings kept the elite close and the dangerous closer. Reclining upon his couch, a cup in hand, he would smile distractedly as Messalina guided the conversation. At times he would frown, puzzled by the undercurrents. "Messalina," he whispered once, tugging at her sleeve, "is it wise to seat Asiaticus beside Vitellius? They are enemies in the Senate." Messalina leaned close, her lips brushing his ear as though in intimacy. "Let them drink together, my husband. Wine makes friends of enemies and fools of them both. Tonight we will learn which." Claudius, comforted by her confidence, returned to his cup, while Messalina's eyes scanned the room, sharper than any soldier's sword. But banquets were only the surface of her grasp. Beneath the laughter and songs, rivalries were cultivated, enemies marked for destruction. Early in her reign, Messalina identified those who might challenge her influence, noble women whose beauty rivaled hers, senators whose voices carried too much weight, relatives of Claudius whose presence threatened her son Britannicus's claim to the throne. One such rival was Julia Livilla, the younger sister of Caligula, elegant, refined, and a direct descendant of Germanicus. Julia's lineage alone made her a threat. She was popular among certain senators who remembered her father's legacy with reverence. More dangerously, she represented an alternative future, one where Britannicus might be overshadowed by a different heir at a feast. Messalina watched Julia closely. The young woman's laughter rang too easily, her admirers clustered too thickly. Messalina's smile remained fixed, but her thoughts turned dark. Later, in the privacy of her chambers, she whispered to Claudius, "My lord," she said softly, her hand resting upon his chest. "Have you noticed your niece, Julia? She speaks often of you, but not with respect. She questions your judgment, and worse, she hints that others might rule more wisely." Claudius shifted uneasily. "Julia, she is family. The people loved her father. I have no wish to harm her." Messalina's eyes glistened with feigned sorrow. "Nor do I, but Rome whispers, my husband. If she plots, It is not against me, but against you and our son. Can we risk Britannicus's future to her ambition? Claudius, ever insecure, sighed. Perhaps I should send her away for her own safety. Messalina kissed his hand tenderly. For the safety of us all. Soon after, Julia Livilla was accused of adultery, a charge as convenient as it was devastating. No proof was needed. Rome had seen such trials before. She was exiled to the barren island of Panditeria, where she would fade into obscurity. Few doubted that Messalina's hand had guided the accusation, though none dared speak it aloud. Such was Messalina's method. She rarely struck openly. Instead, rivals found themselves undone by charges of immorality, whispers of treason, or the sudden withdrawal of imperial favor. Senators who resisted her influence discovered their estates audited, their reputations tarnished. Noblewomen who competed for attention saw themselves disgraced, their names dragged through the courts. Each downfall sent a clear message. In Rome, survival depended upon her goodwill. Not all her enemies fell silently. Some muttered that the empress was corrupting Claudius, that the empire was ruled by a woman's whim. Yet these complaints rarely escaped the marble walls of private villas. Publicly, Rome submitted. After all, Messalina's feasts dazzled. Her generosity to allies enriched them, and her position as mother of the emperor's heir made her untouchable in the marketplaces. Sellers joked that Claudius rules the world, but Messalina rules Claudius. The jest spread, carried by wine sellers and laundresses, repeated by slaves in kitchens and by children in alleyways. The Senate, hearing the echo, forced themselves to laugh, though uneasily. Even Claudius heard the rumor. One evening, as he and Messalina dined privately, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "They say," he murmured, eyes downcast, "that I am governed by you, that you whisper, and I obey." Messalina's laughter was soft, musical, and disarming. She reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. "Is it wrong for a wife to care for her husband? Do I not lighten your burdens, soothe your worries? Let them talk, my love. They envy what we share. They have wives who plot against them. You have one who protects you." Claudius, moved by her words, squeezed her hand. Yes, that is true. You are my shield, Messalina." Her smile deepened. A shield and a sword, though he did not see it. The more her enemies fell, the more Messalina's confidence grew. She began to flaunt her dominance more openly. Her banquets became the stuff of legend, notorious for their excess. Night after night, senators reclined on ivory couches as dancers swayed. Actors performed body comedies, and fountains spurted wine instead of water. Some nights lasted until dawn, the guests staggering into the streets, their dignity left behind in her triclinium. Yet these were no mere entertainments. Messalina studied every word, every glance. She knew which senators' hands trembled too much with drink, which generals' pride could be flattered into loyalty, which aristocrats' debts could be turned into chains. Her parties were nets, and every guest was a fish struggling within them. Rome began to whisper louder. Moralists shook their heads at the spectacle, muttering that the empress was corrupting the city with luxury and vice. Yet none could deny her brilliance. She had transformed Claudius's household into a shadow government, where decisions were made not in the Senate but over platters of oysters and goblets of wine, and so the empire bent around her. Claudius trusted her implicitly. The Senate feared her, and the people gossiped but obeyed. What had begun as subtle influence had blossomed into open dominion. Rome was hers to grasp, and she held it tightly, with hands both velvet and steel. Rome, at its height, thrived on order, the strict order of the legions, the order of law, the order of the gods. Yet beneath that order lay the raw terror of power, the knowledge that one command, one whisper, could end a life. Under Messalina, this truth became stark. If her earlier years had been marked by charm and seduction, the next were defined by fear. It began quietly, with purges that slipped beneath the notice of the masses. Senators and equestrians, men of wealth and influence, found themselves accused of treason on charges so vague they were impossible to refute. A jest at a banquet, an old loyalty to Caligula, even a refusal to flatter the empress might be enough. Claudius, hesitant by nature, looked to his wife for guidance, and Messalina, serene and convincing, told him what to believe. "They are plotting against you." "My husband," she whispered, late one night, as Claudius sat with scrolls spread before him. "I hear it in their silences, see it in their eyes. Rome is not safe while these men breathe." Claudius, weary, rubbed his brow. "But must it always be blood, Messalina? Can we not win them with kindness, as Augustus once did?" Messalina's gaze sharpened. "Kindness is weakness. Do you wish Britannicus to inherit a throne secure, or a throne crawling with vipers?" The mention of his son silenced Claudius. Fearful of losing all he had unexpectedly gained, he gave his reluctant nod, and with that, another name was added to the lists. The purges spread like cracks in marble. Trials became spectacles, accusations weapons. Senators who dared question policy found themselves condemned, their estates confiscated, their families ruined. Those who survived learned the lesson well: bow to the empress, or perish. But the blood that stained Messalina's hands was not only political, it was personal. Among her most notorious acts was the destruction of Valerius Asiaticus, a wealthy senator from Gaul. He had served Rome with distinction, earning both honor and wealth, but his true crime, in Messalina's eyes, was possession of something she desired: the magnificent gardens of Luke, sprawling with terraces, fountains, and shaded groves, at one of her feasts. Messalina gazed across the table at Asiaticus, noting his calm dignity, his popularity among peers. A smile curved her lips, though her thoughts were venomous. "He sits too proudly, and those gardens, they would suit me better." Within weeks, Asiaticus was accused of plotting against the emperor. Dragged before Claudius, he stood tall, his voice steady. "I am guilty only of serving Rome," he declared. "If that is treason, then all loyal men are guilty." Claudius hesitated, torn by the man's reputation and by his own uncertainty. But Messalina leaned close, her hand upon her husband's arm. "Do not be swayed," she whispered. "Asiaticus covets more than loyalty. He covets the throne. Spare him, and you endanger us all." The verdict was death. Asiaticus permitted the Roman dignity of choosing his manner of dying, entered the steaming baths of his villa, opened his veins, and let the water carry away his life. The gardens of Lucullus were seized, and not long after, they belonged to Messalina. The whispers in Rome grew louder. "A man dies," muttered one senator, "and an empress gains a garden. Is this justice or plunder?" Yet none dared speak openly, for by now it was clear, to accuse Messalina was to condemn oneself. Nor did her vengeance spare her own kin. Julia Livilla, once merely exiled, remained too dangerous. Her beauty, her imperial bloodline, her popularity, all made her a threat to Britannicus's future. From exile, Julia still had sympathizers in the Senate. Rumors suggested she might return, that she might yet challenge Messalina's dominance. Messalina would not allow it. She approached Claudius once more, feigning reluctance. "My husband, your niece, is unrepentant. Even in exile, she conspires." Letters pass from Panditeria to senators here in Rome. "If she returns, she will raise herself above our son." Claudius's face was pained. "She is blood of Germanicus, my brother's child. Must I condemn my own kin again?" Messalina's eyes filled with false tears. "And must I watch my child endangered? Which weighs more, the memory of your brother or the life of Brit?" It was a cruel dilemma. Claudius, torn between loyalty and fear, gave way. Julia Livilla was soon condemned. Some accounts say she was quietly executed, others that she wasted away in exile. Either way, her voice was silenced, and Messalina's triumph complete. The Senate trembled. Each trial that followed seemed less about justice than about Messalina's amusement. She took a perverse pleasure in watching noblemen squirm, their voices breaking as they begged for mercy. At one such trial, Claudius sat in solemn judgment, but all eyes were on the empress. She reclined upon her couch, adorned in shimmering silk, her expression cool as the condemned pleaded. "Mercy, Augusta," one cried, falling to his knees. "I am innocent. Spare me, for the sake of the gods." Messalina tilted her head, as though considering. Then she gave a small smile. "The gods are silent. Why should I speak for them?" Her word was enough. The guards dragged him away, his cries echoing down the marble halls. Messalina's laughter was quiet but unmistakable. Some senators shivered, others lowered their eyes. Fear became her throne, more secure than marble or gold. The people of Rome, though largely untouched by these purges, were not blind. In taverns, they whispered that the emperor was ruled by a cruel queen, that the blood of noble houses was shed for her amusement. But fear kept them silent. After all, trials were public, executions a form of theater. Citizens who gathered to watch felt both horror and satisfaction. Horror at the spectacle, satisfaction that it was not they who suffered. Messalina understood this psychology well. By making examples of the powerful, she reassured the commoners that their empress was invincible, untouchable. Better to whisper her name with dread than to dare oppose her. In time, even Claudius began to falter. One evening, weary from the weight of so many deaths, he turned to his wife Messalina. He murmured, "The Senate fears me, no, fears you. Is this the Rome I wished to govern? Must every petition end in blood?" Messalina placed a gentle hand upon his cheek, her smile tender. "They fear you because you are strong. You are no longer the scholar mocked in shadows. You are emperor, master of life and death. They tremble because you are worthy." Claudius's eyes softened. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. And so he nodded, though a shadow lingered in his heart. Thus Rome entered a reign of fear. Gardens stolen in blood, noble women exiled, senators silenced, all fed the legend of Messalina. She was no longer merely an empress. She was a predator draped in silk, her beauty a mask for cruelty, and the city, trembling beneath her gaze, submitted. But fear, though powerful, is brittle. It cracks under strain. It breeds hatred as well as obedience. And even as Messalina reveled in her triumphs, the seeds of her downfall were being sown. Rome prided itself on its institutions, the Senate, the magistracies, the ancient balance between emperor and republican forms. To the outside world, these institutions still seemed intact under Claudius. Decrees were debated, elections were held, monuments dedicated in the emperor's name, but those who looked closer saw a new order taking root, not an official one, but a shadow government, a court that owed allegiance not to Claudius, but to Messal. It began with her household. Freedmen and freedwomen, once obscure servants, rose swiftly through her favor. They carried her messages, brokered alliances, whispered in ears of senators who thought themselves immune to female influence. A nod from Messalina could elevate a man to wealth. Her silence could consign him to ruin at her banquets. One might see senators seated alongside actors, gladiators, and former slaves, a mingling scandalous to the Roman elite, but deliberate. For Messalina valued not pedigree, but loyalty. She was weaving a new aristocracy, one bound not by blood, but by dependence on her. You see, she said one evening, reclining among her guests, a cup of Falernian wine in hand. The old republic is gone. Nobility is no longer who your father was, but who your friends are. And who, my lords, is your greatest friend? The laughter that followed was tinged with unease. They knew the answer, she demanded. Messalina. Her influence seeped into the Senate itself. Claudius, burdened by his own insecurities, often relied on her recommendations when appointments arose. A governorship in a wealthy province, a priesthood in the imperial cult, even a consulship, all might be won if Messalina whispered a name at the right moment. Trust him. My husband, she urged one afternoon as Claudius fretted over a nomination. He has always shown me loyalty. He will serve you faithfully. Claudius, relieved to be spared a decision, signed the decree, and another man became indebted to the empress rather than the emperor. Some senators grumbled privately, but most submitted. Better to survive within Messalina's circle than be destroyed outside of it. Elections, though largely ceremonial under the Principate, also became tools of her will. Candidates courted her favor with lavish gifts, whispered promises, or even more intimate bribes. Stories spread of men debasing themselves simply for the chance to wear the toga of office under her. Sponsorship. At one such gathering, a nervous young noble begged her support. "Augusta, grant me your favor," he stammered. "With your word, I shall be certain of election." Messalina smiled sweetly, setting her goblet down. "My favor is not given, young man. It is earned. Tell me, what will Rome gain if you rise? And more importantly, what will I gain?" The young man flushed crimson, but he understood. Those who wished to rise in Rome now bargained not with the emperor, but with his wife. Her power extended beyond politics. Messalina grasped the importance of image, of monuments that would etch her presence into Rome's very stones. The gardens of Lucullus, Once Asiaticus's proud estate became a stage for her grandeur. Statues of herself and Britannicus adorned the grounds, mingling with fountains and marble colonnades. Visitors could not walk the shaded paths without being reminded of who had claimed this paradise. She sponsored public works under Claudius's name, but made certain her own role was visible. Inscriptions hinted at her generosity. Dedications spoke of the Augusta as benefactor of the people. When Claudius opened a new aqueduct, Messalina ensured she was present at the ceremony, standing just behind him, her image almost as commanding as his. "Do you see?" she whispered to a confidant as the crowd cheered. "They shout for Claudius, but their eyes are on me." Yet, perhaps, her most profound influence lay in the shifting place of women within Roman society. For centuries, noble women had been powerful in private, but discreet in public. Livia, the wife of Augustus, had shaped an empire from behind veils and whispers. But Messalina was different. She did not hide. She hosted feasts that rivaled the emperor's, received foreign envoys, granted audiences. Younger women of Rome began to imitate her, adorning themselves with bolder jewels, speaking more freely at gatherings, maneuvering in politics through their husbands and lovers. To conservatives, it was scandalous. "What are we becoming?" muttered an old senator, watching the wives of his peers glide through the forum with confidence once reserved for men. Rome is ruled by women in silks, while men sit silent in the Senate. But to others, it was intoxicating. For Messalina's reign, however fleeting, showed that women could wield open power, not merely the shadows. This parallel court, this shadow government, thrived on secrecy and performance. In her halls, decisions were made that shaped provinces, toppled fortunes, and redirected Rome's destiny. Claudius himself often remained unaware of how deeply his wife's influence reached, and yet there were cracks. For those who bent too far to her will, resentment brewed. Senators stripped of dignity, wives humiliated by Messalina's brazenness, magistrates forced to grovel, all remembered the sting. Fear kept them silent, but hatred fomented in silence too. One evening, as she reclined in her gardens, Messalina mused aloud to a trusted freedwoman. "Rome bows to me as it bows to him, but they pretend otherwise. They call me Augusta, but what I am is more. I am Rome itself, desired, feared, obeyed." And yet, she trailed off, eyes darkening as torches flickered against marble. "They will never write it, so the historians, the poets, they will give Claudius the credit. They will pretend I was merely his wife." Unless she broke into a laugh, dismissing the thought. But her words hung in the warm evening air. By now, Messalina's shadow government was undeniable. Rome's senators and equestrians might swear loyalty to Claudius, but they bent their knees to her. Magistrates drew lots for provinces, but the true lots were cast in her chambers. Monuments bore the emperor's name, but the people knew whose hand guided their creation. She had achieved something unprecedented, not merely influence, but rule itself, without ever claiming the title of empress. And yet, her power rested on fragile foundations: fear, desire, and scandal. A throne built on such things cannot last forever. Already, destiny was preparing its reckoning. Power had given Messalina everything: wealth, fear, submission. And yet, in the quiet hours of her palace, she discovered something she had never truly held: passion. For, in the calculated theater of Roman politics, love was a luxury denied. Her marriage to Claudius was duty, a bond forged for survival and legacy. But her heart, restless, insatiable, began to wander. It was then that she met Gaius Silius. He was the perfect Roman noble, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of sculpted features that poets compared to Mars himself. A consul designate, admired by senators, whispered about in the baths. He carried himself with an ease that came only to men certain of their destiny. Yet behind his strength lay recklessness, an eagerness to gamble, to dare, and to Messalina that recklessness was irresistible. Their first meeting, according to rumor, was at a banquet. The torches burned low, wine loosened tongues, and amid the laughter of Rome's elite, their eyes met across the triclinium. Silius raised his cup slightly, the gesture almost imperceptible, but Messalina noticed. She held his gaze a moment too long, then turned away with a smile that sealed his fate. Later that night, when musicians played and guests wandered through gardens scented with roses, Messalina approached him. "You look bored among these tired men," she murmured, her voice low. Silius bowed his head, lips curling. "Perhaps I was waiting for someone worth noticing." She tilted her chin, studying him as though he were already hers. "Careful, consul. Some games are dangerous to play." Silius met her eyes without flinching. "Then let me be reckless." From that night, the affair ignited. At first, secrecy was observed. Messalina, accustomed to intrigue, arranged meetings in secluded villas, cloaked by night. Servants loyal to her ushered Silius past guards, who pretended not to see, but passion soon overcame caution. Silius was not content with whispers and shadows. He paraded through the city, with the Empress at his side, strolling in gardens, dining openly in her company. Rome, astonished, pretended not to notice, for what citizen dared call shame upon the emperor's wife? At feasts, they sat together, speaking in low tones, laughing at private jokes. Senators shifted uncomfortably, wives whispered behind veils, but none spoke aloud. Claudius, absorbed in governance and blinded by trust, seemed oblivious. Or perhaps he chose not to see. Messalina was intoxicated, not only with Silius's body, but with the sense of danger itself. Each public appearance was a challenge to the order of Rome, a declaration that she could break every rule and still command submission. One evening, in the gardens of Lucullus, they reclined upon a couch while musicians played. Torches flickered, casting shadows across marble statues. Silius leaned close, his voice urgent. "Leave him," he whispered. "Claudius grows old, weak. Rome would cheer if I stood beside you, if Britannicus were raised as my son. We could rule openly, not in shadows." Messalina's eyes glittered. "Do you dare dream so boldly?" "I dare everything," Silius replied. "Why should we crawl in secret when we could stride in daylight? Let us take what is ours." Messalina's pulse quickened. The thought was madness, unthinkable, yet thrilling. To exchange Claudius's hesitant love for Silius's fire. To rule not merely as empress, but as queen in all but name. By now, her disregard for boundaries was total. She flaunted the affair before Rome. She sat beside Silius in the theater, their whispers drawing more attention than the actors. She invited him to feasts where foreign envoys watched in astonishment. unsure whether to bow first to emperor or to the man who seemed his rival. The whispers in Rome turned from shock to dread. "Has the empress lost her senses?" murmured one matron. "No," answered another, eyes darting nervously. "She has simply discovered she can do anything she pleases." For Messalina, Silius became more than a lover. He was a symbol of rebellion against the restraints of tradition, of her refusal to be bound by even the emperor. Their love was both passion and politics, a bond forged in defiance. But beneath the fire lay danger. For every step they took together in public, every boundary crossed, they courted not only scandal, but annihilation. Rome could tolerate many things from its rulers: cruelty, greed, excess. But cuckolding the emperor and flaunting it before the world, that was treason in its boldest form. One night, as Messalina lay with Silius, she voiced what both had long known. "They fear me already," she whispered. "The Senate trembles at my word, and now with you I feel untouchable. Perhaps," her lips curved into a smile, "perhaps Rome is ready for more than Claudius." Silius took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "Then let us make Rome ours." It was no longer an affair. It was a conspiracy dressed as romance, a seduction entwined with ambition. Messalina had crossed the invisible line from desire to treason, and with each kiss, each feast, each bold appearance, she drew closer to the precipice that would destroy her. Rome had seen many scandals: emperors who debased themselves before gladiators, nobles who squandered fortunes on banquets, priests who mocked the gods. But nothing in the city's long memory compared to what Messalina was about to attempt, for she would not merely love another man, she would marry him while still wife to the emperor. The preparations began in whispers. Messalina and Silius, emboldened by their public displays, no longer wished to hide behind secrecy. They dreamed of legitimacy, of transforming their illicit union into a claim upon Rome itself. If they wed, Silius could position himself not as a lover, but as consort, protector of Britannicus, even heir to the throne. It was madness, sheer madness, and yet, in the fever of their passion, it felt inevitable. Messalina's attendants, loyal out of fear or greed, were sent to procure priests, musicians, garlands of flowers. Invitations, whispered rather than written, spread through the city's noble houses. Senators, who had once bowed reluctantly, now received summons to the most dangerous gathering of their lives. "Attend," one freedman warned a wavering guest, "or be counted among her enemies." And we know what happens to her enemies. Thus, Rome's elite prepared themselves, caught between horror and self-preservation. The day came like a fever dream. The streets near Silius's house were hushed, as though the city itself held its breath. Inside, the rooms were draped with flowers, the air thick with incense. Priests of the state religion stood ready, their expressions pale but obedient. Nobles gathered in their formal togas, avoiding each other's eyes. All knew they were complicit in sacrilege, but none dared refuse. And then she appeared, Messalina, dressed not as a widow or a bride-to-be, but as a queen. Silks of deep crimson flowed about her, jewels sparkled in her dark hair, and her face glowed with triumph. She moved with the assurance of one who believed the gods themselves favored her audacity. At her side stood Silius, radiant in his youth, handsome as the poets claimed. He clasped her hand with fierce pride, as though already emperor. The priests began their chants. Offerings were made, wine poured upon the altar, the sacred words intoned. Guests shifted uneasily, some mouthing the prayers, others staring in stunned silence. Was this real? Was the Empress of Rome truly marrying another man, under the eyes of the gods and the gaze of half the Senate? Yes, it was happening. One guest, trembling, later recalled, "Never have I felt such dread. We were part of something monstrous, yet no one dared speak. To refuse her was death, to join her was treason. We stood in silence, like men walking into our own graves, as vows were exchanged." Messalina lifted her chin, her voice steady. "I take you, Gaius Silius, not in secret, but before gods and men. As wife, as partner, as equal." The words rang like a declaration of war, emboldened, declared, "And I take you, Valeria Messalina, not as mistress, but as wife, and with you, Rome itself." The priests, bound by ritual, completed the ceremony. The sacrifice was made, the marriage sealed. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then louder, until the hall echoed with forced celebration. Cups were raised, music struck up, dancers performed. Yet beneath the revelry lay terror, for every man present knew he had witnessed a crime that shook the foundations of the empire. Meanwhile, Claudius remained oblivious. He had gone to Ostia, inspecting works on the harbor, surrounded by freedmen and officials who shielded him from scandal. Reports of his wife's audacity trickled to him, but he dismissed them. Messalina wed another. Absurd, he scoffed to Narcissus, his secretary. "She is foolish at times, but loyal. My Augusta would never dare such madness." Narcissus exchanged a grim look with the other freedmen. They knew the truth. Messalina's marriage was no rumor. It was fact, and it threatened not only the emperor's dignity, but his throne itself. At the wedding feast, Messalina reveled in her triumph. She and Silius sat enthroned, drinking deeply, laughing as though Rome itself were theirs. The guests, masking dread with forced smiles, applauded each jest, toasted each kiss. One senator leaned toward his neighbor, whispering through clenched teeth, "This is not a wedding. This is a coup." Yet no one moved against them. Fear of Messalina still outweighed fear of the emperor. But in Ostia, Narcissus finally spoke the truth. "Caesar," he said firmly, "you are betrayed. Even now, in Rome, Messalina is married to Silius." The Senate witnessed it. The priests blessed it. "If you do not act, tomorrow you will be emperor no longer." Claudius's face paled, his hands trembling as he gripped the arms of his chair. "Married, my wife. By the gods, you jest." "I do not jest," Narcissus cut him off. "If you hesitate, Silius will come with troops, with the Senate's backing, with your wife at his side. He will claim your throne. You must return to Rome at once." The emperor's world collapsed in that moment. He had been mocked all his life for weakness, called a fool, a puppet. Now he realized the cruelest mockery of all. His own wife had dared to crown another in his place. As Claudius's carriage rushed back toward the city, the impossible truth spread. The emperor knew. The illusion shattered, and with it, Messalina's boldest dream began to crumble. What she had thought the most audacious act in Roman history would soon prove the most fatal. Rome awoke to a city divided in whispers. The impossible wedding, too brazen to be rumor, had become fact. Messalina had crowned herself in another man's arms, and now the emperor knew. What had seemed triumph beneath garlands and torchlight transformed overnight into doom. And doom, when it came swiftly. Narcissus strikes in Ostia. Narcissus wasted no time. He had long loathed the empress, fearing her cruelty, watching her grow into a force that eclipsed his master. Now, at last, he saw his moment. Caesar, he urged Claudius, if you hesitate, you are undone. Messalina has crossed every boundary. She is no longer your wife. She is a usurper. The Senate knows it. The people whisper it. Only speed can save you. Strike now, before she gathers support. Claudius, pale and trembling, looked to his other advisers. Callistus and Pallas exchanged uncertain glances. Some counseled leniency, others delay. But Narcissus's voice rose above them all. Do not be weak, Caesar. While you debate, Silius gathers men. While you pity her, she sharpens the dagger for your back. You must act. For once, Claudius listened. He gave Narcissus full authority to command in his name. The imperial freedmen seized the opportunity like a general taking the field. The Praetorians, move messengers, sped into Rome. The Praetorian Guard, loyal more to their paymaster than to any sentiment, received orders: surround Messalina's villa, arrest her companions, bring her and Silius to account. The soldiers moved with grim precision. Bronze armor glinted in the morning sun as they marched through the streets. Citizens, sensing the drama, pressed against walls, murmuring to one another. It has come, one man whispered. The empress has flown to near the sun at the villa of Messalina. Panic erupted. Courtiers scattered, slaves fled. Noble guests who had toasted her wedding only hours earlier now sought excuses, alibis, anything to distance themselves from her inside. Messalina paced like a caged lioness, her silks disheveled, her face pale yet defiant. They will not dare touch me, she hissed. I am Augusta. I am the mother of Britannicus. Claudius loves me. He will forgive. But her attendants saw the fear in her eyes, the twitch in her hands. For the first time, the empress who had made Rome trembled herself. Betrayals' loyalty vanished like smoke. Freedmen who had once bowed low now slipped away. Senators who had smiled at her feasts rushed to the forum to proclaim their innocence. Even household slaves, once her confidants, deserted, muttering that they had never approved of her shamelessness. Silius, however, did not flee. When the Praetorians stormed through the gates, he stood waiting in his toga of office, tall and composed. He knew the end had come, and he resolved to meet it as a Roman. I will not hide, he declared. Let them see that Gaius Silius dies with dignity, not in shame. Messalina clutched his arm. Do not speak of death. Claudius will hear me. He will forgive. He must forgive. Silius looked at her then, his expression a mix of love and sorrow. Messalina, you do not understand. Claudius may have been blind, but Rome is not. We have crossed a line no one survives. The tramp of soldiers echoed in the halls. Messalina's bravado faltered. Her courtiers fell to their knees, begging the guards for mercy, offering to betray secrets for their lives. The empress who had laughed at senators, please now heard the same pitiful cries around her, and realized how hollow they sounded. Panic dragged from her villa. Messalina was thrust into the street, her once radiant robes torn, her hair disordered. Crowds gathered, staring wide-eyed, as the Augusta was led away like a common criminal. Some gasped, others sneered. "So falls the mighty," muttered a vendor. "Better her than us." Another said grimly. Messalina cried out, demanding to see Claudius, insisting she could explain. "Take me to him. He will not condemn me without hearing me." But the soldiers ignored her pleas. Meanwhile, Silius was led to the prison. Offered no trial, no chance of defense, he accepted his fate. "I have lived with honor," he told the centurion calmly. "And if love of Messalina is my crime, then I die guilty, but unashamed." He bared his chest, refusing blindfold or delay. With a swift thrust, the executioner's sword ended his life. Thus perished Gaius Silius, the man who dared to marry an emperor's wife. His death, though quiet, was remembered as noble, almost heroic. The empress in chains Messalina remained, trapped in the Praetorian's grip. She pleaded, wept, promised. To her guards she offered gold. To her friends she offered future favors. To the gods she offered prayers. But nothing availed her. For now the city itself turned against her. Senators convened, furious at the humiliation she had cast upon them by forcing them to witness her marriage. Noble families whispered of vengeance. Even the people, once entertained by her scandals, recoiled at the audacity of her betrayal. And above all, Narcissus ensured no voice reached Claudius but his own. "She cannot be forgiven," he urged the emperor. "If you spare her, Rome will despise you. Strike now, Caesar, and show the world you are master, not puppet." Claudius, weak and uncertain, hesitated, but Messalina's fate was already sealed. In the villa where she was confined, Messalina clung to hope. She imagined Claudius arriving, forgiving her as he always had, restoring her to power. She rehearsed her words, her tears, her excuses, yet outside, the Praetorians waited with drawn swords. Rome, once hers to command, now stood united in silence, awaiting her end. And the woman who had ruled through desire and fear discovered, at last, that neither could save her. The empress had fallen. The sun dipped low over Rome, painting the rooftops in copper and blood. Within the gardens of Lucullus, where emperors and generals once strolled in triumph, Messalina now sat trembling, no longer mistress of the empire but a prisoner of her own ambition. Around her, Praetorian soldiers stood rigid, their spears fixed upright like silent judges. She clutched her robe about her eyes, darting toward the gate again and again. Somewhere out there, Claudius still lived, and as long as he lived, she believed she could reach him. "Take me to him," she begged a centurion, her voice raw. "I am still Augusta. I am the mother of Brit." "He cannot kill me." The officer said nothing. His eyes remained forward, his jaw locked, as though silence itself was an armor against her words. Messalina's thoughts raced. She had escaped storms before. When accused of adultery in whispers, she had smiled and laughed it away. When senators condemned her scandals, she buried them in wine and feasts. When rivals rose, she crushed them. Always she had found a path back to Claudius, who had never been able to deny her tears, her soft hands, her pleading eyes. Surely now, even now, he would come, but far away at Ostia. Claudius sat in silence. Claudius's cold decision. The emperor was weary, his eyes sunken with confusion. He had returned from inspecting the harbor works to find Rome ablaze with rumor. His wife married to another, the mother of his children flaunting betrayal before the eyes of gods and men. Claudius, as always, hesitated. Was it true? Could Messalina, his Messalina, have dared such madness? He asked for proof, and proof was brought. Senators swore it. The praetorians confirmed it. Even the priests who had stood at the altar attested. Still he faltered. But she is the mother of Britannicus. She is my wife. Narcissus leaned close, his words sharp as daggers. She is no wife, Caesar, but a usurper. If you forgive her now, you will seem weak, a laughingstock before Rome. Strike her down, or she will strike you down. Claudius wavered. Some part of him longed to see her face once more, to hear her excuses, to believe her lies, as he always had. But another part, the humiliated husband, the shamed emperor, shrank from the thought of forgiving again. Let the Senate judge, he murmured. No, Caesar, Narcissus pressed. If the Senate judges, it will delay. She will gather allies. No, act now. She has forfeited mercy. At last Claudius nodded, his lips pale, and do as you think best. It was all the authority Narcissus needed. He sent a swift messenger galloping back to Rome, bearing the death warrant. Messalina's last pleason, the gardens. Time stretched thin. Messalina had sent letters, bribes, and pleas through her attendants, demanding that Claudius hear her. He cannot condemn me without hearing me, she muttered to herself, over and over, as if the repetition could make it true. At her side, her mother, Domitia Lepida, arrived, her face stern. Unlike Messalina, she read the signs clearly. She had seen enough of imperial politics to know mercy would not come. Daughter, she whispered harshly, stop this wailing. Claudius will not see you. Already the soldiers wait. You must be strong, or at least die as a Roman. Messalina stared at her in horror. No, no. He loves me. He always has. He will come. Domitia's eyes softened for a moment, but her words were cold. Hope is a luxury you can no longer afford. Just then, the sound of hoofbeats cracked the air. A rider dismounted, handing a scroll to the centurion. Messalina leaped to her feet. It is Claudius. He summons me. But the soldier broke the seal, read in silence, and his face remained stone. Slowly, he nodded to his men. The praetorians shifted, their armor clinking. Messalina froze. The truth struck like ice in her chest. Claudius had spoken, and it was not in her favor. The execution the soldiers closed in. Messalina backed toward a cypress tree, shaking her head violently. No, no, this is a mistake. He wants to see me. He must want to see me. The centurion stepped forward, sword in hand. His voice was flat. It is the emperor's command. Messalina's breath came in ragged gasps. She turned to her mother, reaching for her. Help me. Speak for me. Domitia's eyes glistened, but her tone was unyielding. Daughter, take your fate in your own hands. Do not wait for the executioner. Do not give your enemies the pleasure. Die with dignity. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The garden, so often filled with laughter and schemes, now stood still. Even the praetorians shifted uneasily. Many had once bowed to her, shared her tables, accepted her gifts. To kill her now seemed both duty and sacrilege. Messalina's hands trembled as she reached for the dagger laid before her. She lifted it, stared at its point, but her courage faltered. She could order deaths with a word, yet the thought of driving steel into her own flesh unmanned her. I cannot, she whispered. Narcissus had anticipated this. He had come in person, lurking in the shadows of the garden. Now he stepped forward, his voice cutting the air. She delays. Do it. The centurion raised his blade. Messalina shrieked, stumbling back, but there was no more escape. With one swift thrust, the sword pierced her. The Empress collapsed, her body crumpling into the grass. Blood darkened the earth beneath her, staining the garden she had once ruled like a queen. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, glazed over. Thus ended Valeria Messalina, not with the roar of a crowd or the pomp of a triumph, but with a single, brutal stroke in the quiet of a garden. Rome reacts. The news spread like wildfire. Before nightfall, the Senate convened, voices raised in fury and satisfaction. At last, cried one senator, the whore is gone. Another sneered, no longer will Rome be mocked with feasts of shame. Decrees were passed, monuments defaced, her name erased from inscriptions. Among the common people, reactions were mixed. Some rejoiced. The Empress had become too scandalous, too arrogant, and her fall seemed justice. Others whispered uneasily, she was Empress. If she could fall so quickly, who is safe? In the palaces of the nobility, relief mingled with fear. Those who had been her allies hurried to renounce her. Those she had wronged dared at last to breathe. But no one forgot how much power a single woman had wielded, and how swiftly she had been crushed when the tide turned. And Claudius, the emperor, received word as he dined that evening. They say, he asked, between bites, has Messalina been executed? When told yes, he merely nodded and continued eating. No tears, no wailing, no final words of regret, only a cold acceptance, as though she had already been a ghost to him the moment she betrayed his trust. But in Rome's memory she lingered. Some called her a monster, others a victim of propaganda. To some she was a cautionary tale, to others a woman who dared too much. What remained certain was this: her end had shaken the empire. The Empress of Rome, who had once controlled senators, generals, even the emperor himself, had died like a criminal, abandoned by all, and in the silence of the gardens where her blood had fallen. The cypress trees stood tall, indifferent witnesses to the fall of one of Rome's most notorious women. The gardens where Messalina died soon fell silent. Her body removed in secrecy, her name whispered with equal parts relief and horror. Yet her story did not end with the thrust of a soldier's sword. In truth, the fall of Messalina was only the beginning of her legend. Long after her death, her shadow loomed over Rome in speeches, in histories, in whispered tales told around lamps when the night grew dark. She was no longer a woman of flesh and blood, but an image, a scandal, a warning. And it was the historians who sharpened her ghost. How historians remembered her Tacitus, ever the moralist. To him, her marriage to Silius was not only adultery, but treason itself, proof of her boundless lust and ambition. He described her death almost coldly, as if it were the inevitable consequence of her own depravity. Suetonius, that collector of imperial gossip, did not spare her either. He catalogued her scandals with relish, recounting feasts, lovers, and intrigues, as though she were less an empress and more a cautionary tale in human excess. Juvenal, the satirist, went further still. For him, Messalina became almost myth, a symbol of unrestrained female sexuality and vice. He immortalized her in lurid verses, accusing her of sneaking out of the palace at night to work in brothels, competing with prostitutes for customers. Few modern historians believe this tale. Cassius Dio, writing later, echoed the same portrait. She was reckless, manipulative, consumed by lust, and her downfall was a lesson to all who sought to overreach. And so, in the official record, Messalina was branded forever the shameless empress, the adulteress who married another man while her husband lived, the woman whose ambition rivaled her desire. But was it all true? Fact versus propaganda. When we peel back the layers of rhetoric and outrage, we find a more complicated picture. Roman historians were almost all men of senatorial rank, men whose class and dignity Messalina had trampled with her feasts, her humiliations, her executions. To them, she was not just an empress, but a living insult, proof that a woman, and worse, a young woman, could bend the mighty Senate to her will. Their pens were dipped not only in ink, but in venom. Consider her so-called marriage to Silius. Was it truly a wedding in the full sense, or a political farce staged by Messalina and her circle? Some argue it was an audacious power grab meant to secure Silius as emperor should Claudius fall. Others suggest it was exaggerated by her enemies into something greater than it was. The final scandal to justify her elimination. Her supposed visits to brothels, her insatiable lust, her nightly competitions with prostitutes, these read more like satire than history, designed to shame her memory rather than record truth. They fit a pattern. Powerful Roman women were often accused of sexual depravity when men could not tolerate their influence. Was Messalina ambitious? Certainly. Was she ruthless? Undoubtedly. But was she the nymphomaniac monster of Juveniles versus the scheming harlot of Tacitus's scorn? Or was she, instead, a woman who learned too well how to wield the dangerous tools available to her in a man's world, seduction, networks, alliances, and was punished brutally when she overstepped? Fact and propaganda blur until they are almost inseparable. What remains clear is not who Messalina truly was, but how the men who survived her wanted her remembered. Lessons on power, gender, and politics. Messalina's life and death shine a light on the world of Roman imperial politics, a world where family ties were weapons, where marriage was strategy, where love and loyalty were as fragile as wax tablets melted in the sun. She reminds us of the peculiar position of women in Rome. Officially, they had no political office, no senatorial voice, no vote. Yet, at the heart of the empire, an empress could wield more influence than any senator. She could whisper in the ear of the emperor, command fortunes, decide careers, destroy reputations. And in Messalina's case, she did all of this with astonishing boldness. But the empire never forgave women who crossed invisible boundaries. A man could be ambitious, ruthless, manipulative, and he would be remembered as a statesman. A woman who dared the same became a scandal. Messalina's downfall shows not only the peril of overreaching, but the double standards carved deep into Roman culture. Her marriage to Silius, whether desperate gamble or audacious coup, was a final act of hubris. Yet it also exposed the fragility of Claudius's reign. If an empress could attempt such a thing, what did that say of the emperor himself? Claudius's weakness, his dependence on freedmen like Narcissus, made him vulnerable, and Messalina exploited that. In the end, her fall saved Claudius's throne, but at the cost of his dignity. And so, her legacy teaches us not only about her, but about Rome itself, a city both fascinated and horrified by the spectacle of female power. A city quick to turn one woman's ambition into a parable of moral decay. Closing reflection and outro. Messalina's story did not fade with her death. For centuries, she has haunted literature, theater, and imagination. Renaissance painters depicted her as the archetype of lust. 19th-century writers cast her as the villainess in plays and novels. Even today, her name conjures images of seduction and scandal. Yet beneath the layers of propaganda, perhaps another Messalina still hides, not only the adulteress and schemer, but the young woman married off at 15 to a man 3 decades her senior, thrust into the brutal machinery of empire, forced to survive in a court where intrigue was air and betrayal was water. Perhaps, in her ambition, we see not only vice, but desperation. In her audacity, not only lust for power, but the struggle of a woman clawing for agency in a world that gave her none. Rome remembers her as a monster. History branded her a warning. But perhaps the truest lesson of Messalina's life is that power, in any age, never forgives those who wield it differently than expected, and never forgets a scandal that can serve as a story. And so we close with the image of the gardens where she fell. The cypress trees still stand, the birds still sing above the quiet earth. Passers-by may not know that once beneath those roots an empress's blood was spilled. But Rome remembers. Rome always remembers. Her name lingers like a shadow, a whisper, a scandal that refuses to die. Nearly 2,000 years have passed since Messalina walked the gardens of Rome, yet her name still lingers, whispered in scandal, studied in history, dramatized in story. Was she a monster, a victim, or simply human, caught in the storm of Rome's most ruthless game? We may never know the full truth, but her tale remains a reminder that power, once grasped, is never easily released, and that in Rome, as in life, the higher one climbs, the further one falls.